You ready, Jeff?
Just roll
Okay.
And action.
Hi, my name is Kurt Cloninger, and I'd like to thank you for choosing this video curriculum of God Views, a presentation that I've
Hey, bud. Need anything?
No, actually, we're just filming an opening segment
Oh,
here.
man, I am so sorry. I didn't know you were shooting in here.
No, it's fine, really.
I didn't know you were doing something before the show.
No problem, really. It's no problem.
Do you need anything?
No, I'm fine. You know what? I could use 2 glasses of water out on the stage when we shoot the live shoot.
Well, you got it.
All
You
right.
got it. So, what's this about now?
The thing we're doing? Well, it's a presentation. It's a theater piece about God, about different ideas people have about God.
No kidding.
No kidding.
Well, that's not exactly your typical, what do you call it, theater piece?
Well, I suppose not. No.
Well, how in the world did you wind up making a theater deal about something like that?
All the tragedies were already taken. Actually, the whole thing came out of some thinking, some reading I did a number of years ago. I read this book by this guy named J.B. Phillips.
Is that the guy that invented the Phillips head screwdriver?
No, that would be a different guy. This guy was a theologian.
Oh, I don't guess a guy like that know much about screwdrivers, would he?
I suppose not. Anyway, this guy Phillips wrote this little book called Your God is Too Small, and
Little book.
yeah, it was a little book with a real big idea that basically exploded my head. So I wound up writing this show based on the book, which turns out the show has impacted quite a number of people over the years. The idea of the show, well, end of the book, was that everybody's got some sort of idea, some sort of picture about God in their head, and your idea about God will pretty much determine how you wind up living your life. Okay, let's say that you think God, and it really doesn't matter whether this is true about God or not, it just matters that you think it's true. You think God is a real meanie, right? You know, like a real ogre, all right? Then,
Well, I'd probably just make all my time, just make sure I wouldn't be in his way.
yeah, bingo. Now, you show me what somebody thinks about God, and I, for the most part, can pretty much tell you how they're going to wind up living their life.
Not bad.
Not bad.
bad. So how long you been doing the show?
Well, since long before my beard turned gray.
That long, huh?
Yeah, that long.
So, how's it end?
I'm not going to tell you that. You're just going to have to wait for the show. So, should we try this again?
Get out of here.
My view of God was the result of a relationship that I'd had with my father, because actually I began to see God in the same way that I had experienced my own father: distant, aloof, unconcerned, and impossible to please. I'd once drawn a picture of God in me. I'd seen Kurt Cloninger's video on God Views, and I decided to draw my own depiction of how I view God. I was at the bottom of the page with my arms outstretched, reaching up toward God, who was high on the page with a large yardstick holding over my head. And as I was looking up at the yardstick, I realized there was no way that I could reach God's standards. That even if I were a world-class pole vaulter, no way could I ever measure up to God's standards. But that didn't keep me from trying. I thought that if I could present God with some impressive list of accomplishments, that, just maybe I could win his love and approval. But even so, it seemed like everything I tried to do, I always felt that God was disappointed in me. My father was a rather distant, cold person. He was gone most of the time, a very successful businessman. He traveled for 2 or 3 months, and then he would come home for a couple of weeks. And of course, we always vied for his attention. There were 4 of us children, and we all wanted time with my dad when he came home. But he only had time for one child, my younger sister. Even though he didn't have time for me, he certainly made heavy demands on me. He would bark out his orders to me. Go get me something to eat. Bring me my shoes. Go help your mom in the kitchen. He was very abusive to my mother as well. I began to hate him. I was so angry that I was just filled with hatred for him. And I never was able to resolve that because he died when I was 12 years old. And we never were able to develop a more wholesome relationship. I remember one incident when I was in the 4th grade. He was home at the time that our report cards came out, and I could hardly wait to show him my report card. Straight A's. I thought surely he would just pat me on the head and say, "Good job, kid." But he didn't. When I presented him with my report card, he just shoved me away and said, "I don't have time for that. I'll see it later." The pain of that was just so incredible. I remember going into my bedroom and just almost doubling over in pain because it felt like I'd been kicked in the stomach. I knew then that there was no way that I could please my father. He was not pleasable. I think what hurt even more, though, was that I was not even important to him. And probably the worst wound of all was that my relationship with him really colored the relationship that I had with God. Well, all of that changed about 3 years ago. I had been to a weekend spiritual retreat, and the retreat leader was praying with me. I'd never had a personal encounter with God. But as he was praying with me, I had a vision of God in me. In fact, it was like watching a movie. I was standing in line at my high school graduation. I was the first in line, ready to go on stage to get my diploma. And I was first because I was the valedictorian of my class. And I saw my father out in the crowd. He was pointing to me and telling everyone around him that that was his daughter, valedictorian of the class. He was so proud of me. I was just feeling so great because finally I had done something to make my father proud. Well, suddenly the scene changed. I was no longer standing at the front of the line. I had been magically transported to the very end of the line. And I knew that we were ranked according to our grade point average. So apparently I'd gone from a 4.0 to a 0.0. And I was just perplexed, what's going on here? I was also embarrassed, to be last in my graduating class. About that time, God, my Father, walked up to me. And then, quite unexpectedly, he just takes the mortarboard off of my head and he sails it up into the air. And then he picks me up and he twirls me around and around and around. I couldn't believe it. I was the last in my graduating class, and God was proud of me. I mean, he was shouting to everybody, "This is my beloved daughter. I am so proud of her." Well, it took a moment before that message really penetrated. God loved me unconditionally. It didn't matter to him if I were a straight A student or an F student. Didn't matter to him if I were beautiful or plain, tall or short, thin or chubby. It made no difference to God. He loved me unconditionally. once that message penetrated my mind, I began to laugh. I couldn't stop laughing. I never experienced such joy in my whole life. It just kept bubbling up. Later that night in the retreat room, God talked to me about the relationship that I'd had with my father. And I began to see that I had viewed God in the same way that I'd viewed my own father, as distant, unconcerned, impossible to please. My view of God has certainly changed. I no longer view him as that impossible to please God with a yardstick holding over my head. I see now that I had put my father's head on God's shoulders. It wasn't God at all who was relating to me in that way. Sometimes now I think of God as my daddy sitting in the chair, bouncing me on his knee, playing with me, talking with me, tickling me, just having a good time with me. I see now that God really wants just an intimate relationship with me. He wants us to enjoy one another. He wants to celebrate life with me. He's asked me to be his dance partner. And I've said yes.